Today we're going to do a shootout video between a Harley Benton and a Chibson. I posted a review of the Chibson a while ago and got some really interesting feedback from folks. I am Big D Guitars. I run a Luthier channel here on YouTube. I've got close to 500 videos of me building, repairing, restoring, staining guitars, and I wanted to give you my 2 cents on sort of the entry-level price point of guitars. Chibsons are Chinese imported fake counterfeit guitars. My buddy bought this guitar a couple years ago and I asked to do a review and it sort of blew up on me slightly. And Harley Bentons are from the Thomas Mann company in Germany. You have to buy one and have it imported over. Similar price point, but significant varying in quality, and wanted to sort of spec them out for you top to bottom. I have a bunch of clips of me playing these at the end, but I wanted to do a review from a Luthier's perspective and show you what the hits and misses are on these lower level guitars. We'll start sort of from top to bottom, what I'm looking at, why I'm comparing them, what I'm looking for. If we start at the very surface, slightly different shape for the Harley Benton. It's got more of a horn versus the Chibson is, essentially a copy. The headstocks are different. Harley Benton has its own unique headstock. The Chibson is going for that Gibson look. If I'm looking at the finishes on the top of the guitar, the Harley Benton finish isn't all that great. He sort of goes outside the line here on the burst, so it's not exactly in line with, let's say, the bottom here. It's much thinner. The Chibson has sort of a more, I would say, rubbed in color like I do in some of my videos. This doesn't look sprayed in. It's got a very wide fan, so I'm assuming they did a wide fan and then scraped it. Something along those lines. It's just not as tight. Different burst, but just wanted to cover that. The veneer top on the Chibson has some glue seepage that you can see here, where the Harley Benton does not. So over time, this will sort of fade. It won't be the same coloring. Over time, it'll get a little bit different. The domes of the guitars, in terms of the carved top, are different. The Chibson, I'd say, has like a 1/2 inch dome with a more flattened out sort of center. The Harley Benton has got at least a 3/4 carve, and it's actually got a very nice carve through the center here, and you can see the pickups are carved here, the pickup mounts that match the top of the body relatively well. The Chibson doesn't have that as much of a carve, so the playability will be slightly better on the Harley Benton in terms of just, you got the strings above the body. They both have the same finish feel, like a 2K, a heavy poly. If we go to the fretboards and looking at the fretboard inlays, the one thing about a guitar that I always look at is how are the inlays done and what sort of tolerance are they done to. That always sort of leads me to believe you've got a better guitar. The Harley Benton, the diamonds come to a point, and there's only a little bit of sort of spacing when they use the epoxy. The Chibsons, you can actually see the color of the epoxy is similar to the diamond, such a much thicker router bit. They come to a point, but then you can see sort of the curve around the inlay. The fretwork on both guitars is okay. I'd say the Harley Benton has cleaned up frets versus the Chibson. The action on the Chibson requires a lot more work. I was originally brought to me to do a setup and sort of clean it up. I played with it a bunch. Action's still a little bit too high. The action on the Harley Benton is actually pretty nice with the nice carve and the nice angle. You actually get a pretty decent playability on it. When I was playing the guitars, the feel, I actually preferred the neck of the Chibson versus the Harley Benton. The Harley Benton is just slightly thinner and I do like the thicker neck. That's just sort of my preference. The one thing I really don't like about the Chibson is they use this tinted lacquer, and you get sort of different color scheme. You can see the white of the binding, and then it's the tinted lacquer, and it's just kind of ugly. Harley Benton does not do that. They have a clear lacquer, and you can actually see it. On the back sides, you've got a similar construction technique with Harley Benton using a upper access profile for the upper frets, which I really like, and they don't have that on the Chibson, obviously. The tuners on both these guitars are terrible. I had a tough time keeping these guitars in tune, and I'll point something out to you on the Chibson that is just awful. I probably should have gotten to that first, but we'll get there as we take off the strings. The tuners are really just garbage. I don't like them on either. You have to upgrade them. The guitars do not stay in tune. The Harley Benton has a 1, 2, 3-piece body, where the Chibson has a 3-piece body that you can see, but they put a veneer cap on it. I don't really like that. That's not my style. Plus, the piece that they use has a couple of knots in it, and usually what that means is that it's sort of the cutoffs, not a great piece of wood, and you don't really know what's on the inside, which is scary. One more thing about the hardware and the plastic, and you guys gave me so much grief before, and I don't understand why, but the plastic on the Chibson feels cheaper than the plastic of the Harley Benton. There's like a hollow feeling. The buttons don't have as much mass as the Harley Benton. The Harley Benton feels better. The tuning or the motion of the pots are very similar. I'd say the Chibson maybe is a little bit better, but I like the feel of the knobs. They have more substance to them. So let's go ahead and take off the strings and show you some of the surprises on the inside. So as we take the guitars apart, get some interesting insights, finding the stuff. The hardware for both of these feels really crappy. I would say the Chibson feels worse than the Harley Benton. The bridge just is sort of flimsy and garbagey. I mean, granted, we're talking about $300 guitars. I'm giving you my opinion of them. And obviously they're not gonna feel great. I would say that the hardware for the Chibson has more pitting in the stop tail piece than the Harley Benton. I actually like the plating on the Harley Benton much better than on the Chibson. The routing on the inside really shows off just how these guitars are taken care of. Nice clean routes in the Harley Benton, and a little bit rough, some wood chips still left over on the Chibson. You've got some buffing compound left on the Harley Benton, and here it's just really ugly. You've got a long neck tenon in the Harley Benton with a short neck tenon in the Chibson. I think the neck probably ends, I don't know, somewhere right here. Could be just a one piece that they plopped down. They chiseled out to get the pickup to fit, where they did not do that with the Harley Benton. Just much more attention to detail on the Harley Benton. And this is the biggest mistake that I see with the Chibson, is that they use these washers to cover up the fact that the bridge is not drilled properly at all. So the bridge post wobbles in here, and it's just not going to stay in tune. So couple that with the shitty tuners, the poorly drilled bridge, this guitar's going to have problems. Some of the guys are like, oh, you can use toothpicks and glue it in. I'm like, why? Buy this. Buy the Harley Benton. It's much nicer. You don't have that at all. It's actually drilled in. The maple top here looks like it's got a center joint here with the veneer on top. This one, I can't really tell at all. I just know I got the veneer here, but I can't tell what the top wood is. If it's all mahogany or if there's a maple piece in there. I can't tell. We'll flip this over. But that is really telling on the longer neck tenon. Well, just has a little bit better of a feel. The pickups say Epiphone on the Chibson. These say Roswell. I've never heard of those. But let's flip this over and look at the control panel. Alright, so here's the back side of the control panel. The Harley Benton is actually very clean versus the Chibson is just messy. A lot of tear out and just kind of ugly. Don't really like it. The Harley Benton is clean. It's also got coil taps, which is nice to have. I played with them a little bit upstairs. I don't like coil tapped humbuckers. They don't really sound like a single coil, but that's an option, which is kind of nice for the entry-level price point that these are at. It looks, I don't know if that's a maple top, but it's definitely lighter. Maybe it's alder on some sort of mahogany. I don't know. But it's much cleaner routing, and looks like real wood of some sort versus the Chibson. For the neck connection here, they both use a cap. So they have one piece of wood, they glue it in and have a cap on the bottom. I don't like that construction technique at all. I like a one-piece neck running through, or at least pieces running this way. I don't like that. I think over time, you're just sort of asking for problems. There's a knot in the Chibson one here. The Harley Benton has that, but it looks a little bit better. The coloring is similar throughout in terms of the back and the top. This is a scarf joint here in the Harley Benton, and that's a one-piece neck, it looks like, other than the cap right here. So there are truss rods in both of these. With the Chibsons, I've not seen truss rods before. This one's a little bit buried, and there's no way for me to push it from here. Sometimes they'll run the channel all the way through, and then you can move the truss rod. Here I actually have to dig it out. This one is right here. It's easy to adjust. I don't like the nuts on either of these. They, like I said, they don't stay in tune, but then the strings also bind in the slot. They don't have the downward sort of pressure to alleviate the whole nut. The whole string sits on the nut, which I really don't like at all. The headstock Harley Benton's got a nice inlay here. The Chibson, the Les Paul is off, and the truss rod cover disappeared somewhere. But it says Les Paul, it says standard or whatever, but it's way off and ugly. One more thing to add on the top. The binding is thicker on the Chibson. It's actually sort of the correct binding. The Harley Benton has, I don't know what it is, but it's a very thin binding, and it just, I don't like the look of it, to be quite honest. I do like the binding look on the Chibson. It's the thicker, it matches the body. I don't like the thinner binding on the Harley Benton here. So let's go upstairs and give you a couple sound clips of these. So at the end of the day, these are both entry-level, price-pointed guitars. I do like the neck on the Chibson. I like that feel, but the combination of everything else I didn't like. I do love the sound of the Harley Benton. It's got just a slightly thinner neck, but the action and the playability, it stayed in tune just slightly better. But I think if I adjusted the nut, I think it's a pretty good giggable guitar without a lot of issues, and you'll actually want to keep it and play with it for a while. The Chibson I really do think is garbage, and I would tell you guys to avoid those at all costs. Just don't do it. But for the price point of the Harley Benton, I'd probably get another one. I was pretty happy with it, and if I knew someone getting in the guitar, I would recommend this for sure. I like the carved top. I like the feel of the frets. The electronics sounded pretty good. You know, it's obviously not a knockoff, which is great. But overall, I was pretty happy with the Harley Benton. Definitely be playing with it. Sounded great through my amps. Just that neck pickup position sounded awesome. Chibson, not so much. The pickups need to be replaced, and it doesn't stay in tune. And I'm not sticking toothpicks and super glue for the bridge. So that is my 2 cents on 2 entry-level price-pointed guitars. A Luthier's review, if you will. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.